Sometimes the truth can be more bizarre than the mystery. But what happens when the answers we've been trying to find finally emerge from the shadows? In today's video, let's explore events where the truth had been buried deep, but the answers that followed became a horror in their own right. During the 1970s up to the 1980s, California was subjected to a series of fearful murders. Home invasions, assaults, murders, they were all tied together somehow. Still, no one knew who this invisible intruder and murderer was. He was just there. He became so good at his game of hide-and-seek that people started to name him the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker. But in the final measure, the world would come to know him as the Golden State Killer. He was not just any kind of criminal. The Golden State Killer was precise, orderly. He followed his targets for days, maybe even weeks, to understand their habits, to see when they were most defenseless. He did not just burglarize homes, he burglarized lives, unlocking doors and windows with such precision as if he owned those places and truly belonged there. First, it was only directed at single women of a young age, but then he began threatening couples, which made his actions even more frightening. He would intrude into the homes, blindfolding his prey with nylon stockings, gagging them with cloth, and tying them up with shoelaces, often using towels to stuff into their mouths. Then he'd wander all through the house, as if he lived there, stealing their clothes and food, and taunting them in his raspy whispers. One of the cruelest things he did was to force the husband to lay face down on the floor and then stack dishes on his back, threatening to kill his wife if he heard one rattle. Like physical aggression, terror was a vital component of the blow. They would later remember how he was calm and how eerily patient he was with them. When asked, the victims described them as being scared not only by his actions but by the way he committed them. It was not enough for him to only be active at night. He needed the victims and the police to be aware of his existence. There was a time when he was one of his early victims, several years after having attacked her. When the girl answered the phone, all he said was, "I am going to kill you," and then he slammed down the phone, hanging up. The same could also be said about the situation with the police themselves. They'd be stalking his trail, tracking down leads to where he could be, and then, zip, nothing was found. The trails ran cold. Sometimes it seemed as if he was thinking a step ahead. He would leave traces behind, enough to acknowledge that there was someone behind this, but not enough traces to catch him and figure out who he was. It was as if he was performing a game in which only he was in charge of the rulebook for decades. The Golden State Killer disappeared off the face of the earth, like he was just a ghost that had never been alive. The cases froze, and everyone expected him to either be dead or go underground for the rest of his life. Then, imagine after so many years, something amazing happened. It was in 2018, whereby DNA equipment had developed enough to give detectives a probable chance of arresting him. Using something called genetic genealogy, wherein they could map out the family tree through genealogy websites, they found a match. On April 24, 2018, they were able to identify him, not just his appearance, but his name. Joseph James DeAngelo. For crying out loud, he was a cop, a police officer, a man of law. He was in his 70s and had been known as a pleasant man among his neighbors, who lived a quiet life. But behind those normal orbs, DeAngelo had the brain of a madman who had been a consistent threat to people of California for years now. On the day they arrested him, the police surrounded his house, so he didn't have a chance to escape. But instead, when they cuffed him, they said he just looked blank, as if he always knew he had this coming, like he'd been waiting. The victims were enraged, hopeful, shocked, and fearful when they learned that the Golden State Killer was in custody. Some said that they for the first time felt relieved, as if threat could no longer harm them or affect them, since he was the one who came into their lives. Some were completely rid of the terror all over again when they finally came to know that the man who had caused them all this trouble was alive and well and leading a peaceful life, while they were all living in trauma. His crimes altered the perception of safety, home, and trust. After more than 40 years, this ghost in the night was unmasked for what he really was. This case truly feels like a film scene out of a serial killer film. On the night of October 15th, 2018, everyone in the happy town of Wisconsin was asleep. Everyone apart from one family. At the edge of the night, something unexpected was heard from one of the houses in the countryside. Gunshots. In the morning, it became clear that something had happened. When the police stepped into the small house, Jayme's parents, Denise and Jayme Kloss, had been shot dead. It was a murder that seemed random. But amid all this horror, one crucial piece of the puzzle was missing: Jayme herself. There was no sight of the young girl. Has she been taken, or was there something much more sinister? The terror spread quickly. What sudden calamity was inflicted upon this family at dead of night? And most importantly, where was Jayme? And this had to go on for hours, for days, for the simple reason that the search for Jayme was on. Police began a sweep of the town, as well as the woods and highways in the area, to find any sign of the missing girl. The local police included the FBI and the people who hosted the efforts. She had been featured on posters, on computers with ads, on newscasts, and more. In the news, like everyone in the small town of Barron was either providing or being provided by it. The reward was placed for anyone who would find Jayme. But as weeks went on, no leads emerged. Even though the search operation was intense, there was still no clue, as if Jayme had disappeared off the face of the earth. Finally, for 88 torturous days, the only option available to everyone was to wait. The question everywhere: was Jayme alive? Who could have done this, and why? The mystery now appeared to be almost insoluble, and it gave to each succeeding day a terror to look upon. Jump to January 10th, 2019. Once in the neighboring town, a woman was taking a walk with her dog, and suddenly a girl ran up to her, scarlet-eyed, skinny, and bedraggled. She introduced herself in a voice filled with both desperation and relief. "I'm Jayme Kloss." She had escaped, and that is when the nightmare changed its form in a split second. Jayme was alive. The whole community and the world outside it was shocked. Despite everything, she had freed herself and returned. But how? What had she endured during 88 days? Jayme was abducted by a man called Jake Patterson, who was a stranger to her family, and apparently a man who had no reason to abduct the girl. Patterson had seen her only once on a school bus one day, and then he knew he had to have her as his captive. That night in October, he went to their house, killed her parents, and then took Jayme within 4 minutes. He kept her sequestered in this log cabin for the next 88 days, cutting her off from society and terrorizing her constantly. That is some real horror when a young child is kidnapped from her home, put in a place that she has never been in before, and has no idea if she is going to make it out of this alive. But Jayme never stopped fighting. She searched for chances, strategized, and prepared, and even if days turned to weeks. Her opportunity eventually arrived when Patterson took off and left the cabin. Jayme ran out into the cold winter night and managed to meet a woman with her dog on the road. All thanks to Jayme's courageous action, the police were able to arrest Jake Patterson shortly. During his arrest, he did not show any emotion. He gave them a clean copy of the details and confessed to all the acts. He stated the facts of his crime, that he had planned her kidnap carefully for weeks, going through each stage of her capture in his mind. Listening to him describe the incidents in such a manner so nonchalantly made everyone feel disgusted at what he had done. Patterson admitted his guilt in 2 cases of first-degree intentional homicide and 1 count of kidnapping, and was sentenced to life imprisonment in the Wisconsin prison system without the possibility of parole. But no sentence could reverse what he had done to Jayme and her family. She was, however, brave enough to ensure that he was never going to harm any other person again. Picture a snowy Tuesday in February 1957, in the middle of the week. The atmosphere is very chilly in the Fox Chase region of Philadelphia. A college student was strolling through the forest, watching the bushes as if hoping to find something strange. And from the shades of the trees, he saw something that caught his curiosity: a big cardboard box broken all over. He got closer, raised the lid, and gasped. Inside the box is the body of a small boy, lifeless and cold. And this boy, whose identity could not be found, became one of the most painful legends in America. The scene police got to that morning was as pathetic as the scene in a tragedy. The boy had a thinned and worn blanket. He had scars all over his skin. Medical experts assumed he was approximately 4 to 6 years old. He was so emaciated that one could see his ribs. He looked like he had been abandoned and possibly even beaten for a while. But the most haunting part? His hair had been shaved off, clearly post-mortem, and his dust-colored nails were neatly manicured to suggest that someone had attempted to groom him. However, that was all the police had to go on. No name, no family, no clear motivation in the sense of why this boy had to die so tragically young. The boy, who appeared to have been dumped in such a brutal way, as he was some trash. The police wanted to know who this little boy. They began one of the most intensive investigations throughout Philadelphia. They started putting his pictures in every store, every home, and even every hospital. Over 400,000 flyers were distributed nationwide, each carrying the boy's innocent face in a plea for help. Do you know this child? People came forward, grieving and demanding explanations. A plethora of tips came pouring in, yet none gave any concrete proof or made any sense of the situation. The police went around the area questioning if anyone knew the boy, even after they had circled around the entire neighborhood. No one had seen him before. It was as if this boy had never existed, leaving only the heartbreaking question, who was he? Many years of research brought several theories for explanation. Probably the most plausible of them was thinking that the boy belonged to a neighboring foster home. The child was near the woods where he was found. Some thought that he had been a ward there. Nonetheless, all the children from the foster home were taken, and there was not enough evidence to link them to this child. Other theories were sinister, reporting cases of abandonment and even abuse. It was rumored that he may have been bought and spirited away as a child, or if he was bought and adopted, was hidden from public sight. People wondered whether the ultimate intention was to imprison him and never let him mix with society, let alone the neighbors that perhaps traded him through the houses they owned. None of these theories helped the boy to find temporary solace or hope. Instead, they layered more grief to an already grieving and tragic story of grief. Until one day, a woman called M in 2002 came forward with a chilling story. She told police and some other personnel that the boy was tortured and killed by her mother, who she said is a wicked woman who likely bought the boy or got him through other means into her family. The scenes that M depicted as torturing the boy were quite disturbing, explaining the horrible conditions the little boy had to face and how they were hidden away from the rest of the world. For as remarkable as the details of M's story sounded, there was no documentation, no physical manifestation of M's account to be found. And it was as if all that was left by which she could grasp, the truth, were but shreds of a nightmare. Her side opened up some intrigue to those investigating, and even if her story painted the kind of reality that could be experienced, it only heaped more mystery and created more questions than answers. Until the end of the 90s, the boy in the box was an unsolved case, a tragic story of a child who never got a name. However, as time went on, technology evolved. Thus, in 2022, forensic genealogy allowed persons to investigate the DNA and possibilities of finding even distant relations, using the public genealogy databases that were available to everybody. Lastly, after 6.5 decades, the name of the boy was revealed. Joseph Augustus Zarelli was his name, and he was not alone. He did have a family, one that might not ever have known what happened to him. When Joseph was finally unmasked, Captain Jason Smith of the Philadelphia PD Homicide Department said something to the media. He indirectly said they had some ideas about who might be behind it, but noted that since it was an ongoing investigation, he could not reveal more information. It was only recently exposed that Joseph's mother, Betsy, was only 21 years of age during his birth, and a few of his close ones think that Joseph was given up for adoption. Family members came forward and argued that there was no way Joseph's parents were cruel to him or mean to him in any way that could have led to his death. This was liberating as well as shocking people. It was a breakthrough. This aspect of Joseph's identity shut a book, but his story was still not fully complete. Who were the individuals that were supposed to defend him? Why was he abandoned? The world was aware of him, but the suffering and the unknown of his life were still fresh.